The thing about robotics is it comes from about 4 or 5 different angles. So there's no one, because it takes all kinds, right? You have like the mechanical engineers are like, oh God, I just want the easiest way to get this done. I don't want to touch this stupid software crap, right? And then you have like the electrical engineers are like, I want to build this really awesome thing, and then somebody else has got to use it. How do I build an API to it? And then you have the software engineers who are like, I heard React is cool, but now I want to do robots and
Yeah.
so you have all different aspects coming in from different directions. So there's no one model person.
Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Behind the Tech. On this one we talk with my dear friend Katherine from Open Robotics, and she talks about the importance of people in building a sustainable open source project.
What did you like the most out of ROSCon this year?
My total personal bias was all the Polish companies that I saw there. That is my complete personal bias. Like, I was one of the first Polish exchange students. I've been over a bunch of times, and every time you go over, you're like, there's more and more just amazing tech companies, and you're like moly, there's like 3 of them here with booths, more or less. And you're like, and then you take them all, and you're like, okay, you guys are all within 100 miles of each other. You need to get together and do something.
I feel like people really need to be reminded of that fact. Like, hey, you can, you don't need us to do that. Like, you can actually got together and like start collaborating.
Like Spain right now.
Yeah. That's what I was saying. Like, Spanish-speaking community in ROSCon was so large, and I felt so good being able to express myself in my native language. And I was telling Mike the other day, I feel like I'm smarter in Spanish than in English, and just getting that handicap out of my way, it was just phenomenal. And everyone felt like very appreciative of the fact that you could just be out there speaking Spanish and like change. Obviously, if there's someone that doesn't understand, you sort of like do that thing where you change.
Did you go to workshops?
I did not go to workshops because I was doing more podcasts.
Oh, okay. Because if you went to the workshops, ROSCon JP had real-time translation to English. So you just put on the headset and you go in there, and it's like, I know all these people vaguely exist because I see like the pull requests, I see like things on Twitter, and then you go in and it's like they're up there speaking, and like they don't speak English, I don't speak great Japanese, but there's a translator in there, and I can like actually follow along. It was pretty cool.
That is really cool.
Yeah, it was very really impressive conference, and you're like, wait, we did this? We pulled this off?
I want to be honest, the main room set up with the cameras and the mics and all that, it felt just so good. Like, you went in there, and even though it was a huge room, it felt like you were really into it, and they really help you make yourself more comfortable watching those things. The morning talks were really good. I really liked the first one, the laparoscopy robot. I didn't know like people were doing that.
Yeah, we've got some stuff we're working on. I can't quite talk about it yet, but there's some stuff that's about to happen with medical stuff. Did you see the lightning talk with the magnetic worm robot?
What? Thing? No, I missed that.
Yeah, so it was like I don't quite know how it works, but it's like a series of I don't know if they're metallic or other magnets, and they it's just like a string basically of different magnets, and they put it somewhere to do some sort of surgery, and they move it with magnetic fields, and it can turn over itself.
What is it with bugs that people want to make them robots? If they're just convenient?
That's how I started. Worked on cockroaches.
You worked on cockroaches? I didn't know that.
Yeah, I worked in Dana Kodachek's lab when I was like 20, and it was simultaneously hexapod robots and putting probes. My first job in college was to take care of a colony of giant cockroaches and to basically insert like stimulus probes into their antennas.
How do you do that?
Very carefully. You get a bunch of you get a bunch of young people with very steady hands and good eyesight, and you just
put the electrode in. Do that. The patience required.
Oh, they're swarming, and they're hissing cockroaches, so they'd hiss. You'd have to be non-squeamish about handling insects. I kind of like insects, not completely, but
I wouldn't be comfortable doing it. I just don't have good motion with my hands.
Well, what's interesting about it? So I transferred to another lab, and then my lab mates basically made a company out of doing cockroach projects. Build your own cyborg cockroach, control it with Bluetooth sort of thing for a while.
Wow, that is incredible.
Yeah.
How did you get involved with ROS?
Jeez. Well, I mean, I knew a bunch of OpenCV people well before I knew a bunch of ROS people. So that was probably the start. I had a good friend in New York who's basically the guy selling the TurtleBot 1. There were like a very small contingent of roboticists in New York, but there are a few. And so that was introduction. And then we ended up both moving to Boston to do a job. And that's when I really got, like, it was this situation, and it's a defunct startup now, but it was all these MIT kids that were like, oh, we'll just put thermal cameras on a car and do Google Maps sort of stuff and do like energy, which houses use the most energy, which houses don't. And if we can plug a bunch of holes, we can probably save a bunch of energy. And they kind of raised a bunch of money, but they weren't able to deliver anything. And it was just this bad situation. We came in and they were just it wasn't that many people. It was like 6-8 people. And they were just very slowly churning through stuff and not getting anything done. And we just said, screw it. And we came in one week, like it was like a 2-day weekend. And we're like, we're just going to do this with Ross. So we grabbed a utility cart. We grabbed all the hardware. So like the Velodyne and the cameras and everything. And we just wired everything up to the cart, pulled down the ROS packages, put it all together. We had something working. Like it was 2 days where we didn't sleep, but we had something together. We had more done in 2 days than they had done in probably 2 years. And that's when I was like sold.
Yeah, I mean, there's no better argument than that. And the people I've been speaking to, that's what they've been saying. Like, yeah, this is great because I can finally focus on the problem that I want to solve instead of having to build all this the tool set that I need or I used to need. Now it's part of the framework that I'm working on. And how did you get involved with Open Robotics?
Oh, I've known a lot of the people there like since Willow days.
Do you want some tea?
Yes. So it was kind of like, I knew they were there. I was up in San Francisco. They were more down in Silicon Valley and a few other places. And, between startups, at some point they pinged me. They're like, hey, you want to do this job? And I'm like, hell yeah, this is the exact job I've been wanting to do for a long time. Cheers. So, yeah. Right place, right time, and they knew who I was. I knew where they were.
And it kind of sort of fits you. I've been watching you from a distance. Now a bit more involved, and we did this meetup in San Francisco, and hopefully we can do more around the world. Hopefully we can get to travel. But I think it sort of fits what you're doing, and having this vocal person out there in the community, I think it's what's needed, because at the end of the day, open source, it's all about the people. It's just like coordinating the people, and I think you're doing a great job. And you can tell at ROSCon, like the attitude from everyone, and it's very positive towards everything that Open Robotics has been doing, and very appreciative to the fact that there's this group of people that are sort of taking the weight from everyone else's and just moving things forward. So some of the things that I wanted to cover while we're here in ROSCon is to try to teach or show the PX4 community and the drone community what it's all about with ROS, because most of them don't really know. There's a portion that do know because they either work in research and they sort of like by default are using ROS and they're implementing it with PX4 or whatnot. But honestly, for the majority of the community, they're not really involved into this, and they don't really understand that there's a wider robotics community that might be solving the same problems they are in more efficient way, just because they're working in a community trying to solve it instead of just me in silo mode doing these things. And even though we're also an open source project,
Not invented here sort of stuff.
yeah, like we do have a lot of tools that are very specific to us, but maybe those tools we can also share them, and we can find more avenues to have free synergy here. So first, trying to explain what this is, what ROSCon is all about as well, and second, sort of like meet other people within the ROS and robotics community that are already doing aerial robotics, because I didn't know that there were so many.
Yeah. That's the
And
problem, is people don't know how to.
yes, and I was like, wow, I've been in drones for the last 10 years, and I didn't know that there were so many people out there using all this stuff. And they have some very basic problems sometimes, like, yeah, they just can't interface this with this. And I was like, something that I can help you immediately. And like, the fact that they don't know where to reach out to or just how to connect with each other speaks to a much larger problem with community organization that I might be part of the problem where I should have done the research maybe. But now that I'm here, I want to help. And what would you recommend we do, sort of from the drone side of things, to help move things forward?
Well, I think, the first thing is just getting people to talk, right? And it's a weird situation because it's also like you need leadership, but it can't be too much leadership. You don't want it, you want it to be a little bit decentralized, but also like sometimes people need to be pointed in directions or made suggestions, and it's a fine balance. But I really do think people sort of get together online slowly. I mean, it may be just a product of the time too, because I think maybe the way the internet's structured now is a little bit different than it was when Ross started and some of these other things too. So I don't know. Maybe because I'm getting older, I don't know the good way. Like, does it start with a Discord? Like,
let's start a TikTok channel.
Yeah, let's start a TikTok channel. Drone TikTok. I'm sure drone TikTok exists.
Oh, it does. I've done the research. Believe me, it does exist.
But I don't. The difficulty with that is that when you're actually doing a project, like the drone, the TikTok is the advertising, and the unfortunate thing is you also need like the CNN or the news channel where actual stuff, real things that you can read and search through. Because the problem with video is you can't search video that well unless maybe it's transcribed, which is the auto transcription stuff has gotten pretty darn good, and that's super helpful. But like even still, like transcribed video is not executable code swatches that you can pick up and use either. Exactly. So like there's a lot to be said about writing.
Yeah, no, definitely. It's all about the content, how do you present it, that matters. And like you're saying, yeah, it's all about presenting the opportunities and so that people know where to go to. So like becoming this big obnoxious loud person that like just keeps on talking about things. And it's fine if there needs to be that person, but like you're saying, you can't be that heavy-handed. Because like you need some leadership, but it's like some soft leadership that it's just there, but you're not eclipsing everything.
Yeah, you don't want to steal credit. You just want to point out that like, people, recognition is good. A little bit of recognition goes a long way. Where you're just saying, this person, hey, check out this cool thing this person did. Check out this cool thing this person just did.
You did that many times, and you did it with me and Simon as well. The one that had this rover. It's amazing product. Like.
Yeah. Oh, totally. I'm very, very interested in that rover. And it was like, hey, you should go talk to Simon. And then I was bringing over like the electronics guy. Hey, like, are you looking for depth sensors? You need like an embedded depth sensor? I know a guy here. Yeah. You go chat. And then it was like, wait, you haven't talked to this other like robotics company that's like, within an hour's drive or an hour train ride? Go talk to them too. Like.
Yeah, and then that's the thing. What people don't understand, like this is much bigger than we imagine sometimes. Like, how many people were at ROSCon?
So initially we said, I want to say 760 or 740, and I think the actual number was 800, and I have no idea what we got on the live stream. But I'm sure it was, I would, at best it's probably 10%. It's probably more like 5% of the actual community.
Well, getting 800 people to Japan during like the lockdown and all the restrictions and the travel and the visa, and people still came. I think that speaks volumes about the need to have this sort of avenues and channels to communicate and coordinate. Because as much as we like doing things virtual, because of the convenience, it will never be able to replace what happens during these events, right? Yeah.
Well, and I think I really wish everyone would go watch ROSCon JP because they're one of the oldest like language-based ROS meetups. Because it's not like, oh, everything's said, like, because I'm not originally from like California. A lot of us aren't. And it really is like, no, you can do these things in the place where you live. You got to go find the other people. And then if you find enough people, you can go throw a party. And like, that's the really cool thing. And that's where like the pushing people sort of thing I think comes in, where it's like, look, how, like you said, like how many Spaniards were here? How many Polish companies were here? How many, you know, from wherever area, you guys all need to talk, right? And you need to figure it out, and it'll be better that way.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of business being made as well in here. Like I was talking to people, and they were like, "Oh yeah, I have a few meetings that I need to attend to, and then I'll go to a talk." And they're actually closing businesses while they work here in ROSCon. So that is also great because it says a lot about how the community is evolving and just growing a lot. I want to ask you more about the developer persona a little bit because I see a lot of interest from other communities into trying to participate more into, like, let's say, okay, maybe I was working in drones and I want to move more working to a different robotics platform. What sort of like skill set that you think or are observing right now that a new person going into robotics should have?
Well, you know, the thing about robotics is it comes from about 4 or 5 different angles. So it's never, there's no one, because you, like, it takes all kinds, right? You have, like, the mechanical engineers who are like, oh, God, I just want the easiest way to get this done. I don't want to touch this stupid software crap, right? And then you have, like, the electrical engineers who are like, I want to build this really awesome thing, and then somebody else has got to use it. How do I build an API to it? And then you have the software engineers who are like, I heard React is cool, but now I want to do robots, and
Yeah.
like, so you have all different aspects coming in from different directions. So there's no one model person.
And what do you think is like there's no like skill set lesson like the toolkit, but maybe about the characteristics of the person that is trying to do this.
I would say, I think the biggest barrier right now fundamentally is like a willingness to work in Linux, because I think it would just work, everything just runs so much smoother. I think that's the biggest one, not being intimidated by like a command line, or just, that's probably the biggest barrier people have, because that's you know, kind of scary. Like that was scary for me, you know, when I went to, well, I, you know, I don't, like, I learned a lot of like Linux to have. It wasn't like I didn't have it around, but I primarily for years and years and years I was like a Windows developer, and then you're like, oh no, I'm going to switch over to being basically a full-time Linux developer. It took a little while. It was a little scary.
Yeah, it's a learning curve, but
you know,
but you are right. A lot of people are afraid of taking that step because it's just going out of your comfort zone. We forget that all operating systems become human interfaces, and you are doing things a certain way, and you have to rewire your way of thinking to be able to adapt the new thing.
well, that's why I think a lot of people have a really hard time initially, because you know, once you understand where things came from, right? Like the way that ROS is shaped is sort of dictated by the way that, you know, Linux is shaped, right? And so, you know, you're really coming up against 2 different learning curves. And so if you're willing to work through the first one, you'll kind of get the second one through the other thing, right? You understand that, oh, I just, you know, everything's going to be a command line call, and I can string them together, and you know, it's not all like click here, click here, click here. It's all sort of text-based and in a terminal, and once you're comfortable with that, you can do a lot of stuff really, really quickly.
There were a lot of folks hiring at ROSCon. Like practically everyone was like looking for someone. What do you think is the career path for a robots developer? So you get started working in a company. Do you sort of see them jumping to one ROS company to another, or is that still not a thing where you build your career around ROS?
Oh, I think it's certainly a thing. I mean, if you enjoy building robots, it will be a thing. If that's what you want to do. You know, you never want to be too locked into one thing. I've taken like a lot, you know, it was like, for a while, it was like, oh, you only do computer vision stuff. You only do that. No, I don't. I do all these other things too. I don't want to like be pigeonholed into this one thing. So I wouldn't say pigeonholing yourself is a good idea, but it's certainly worth learning. And I think you could definitely, you know, move around and you know, maybe one week you're working on drones, next week you're doing like food robots, and you know, the next gig you get, you're doing, you know, space stuff. I mean, there's a wide swath of things you can do. Because like, at the end of the day, Rust is really just like, it's, you know, hardware interfaces, controls, sensor processing. It's the same three things, just mixed up in different ways every single time.
Yeah, definitely. And I do see a lot of companies doing a lot of different things. So like the range, the
Space, medical, like exploration.
just from the exhibitors
driving.
of the show, there was so much diversity in there. Like, and then I can just only imagine that the people that not even explore, like exhibiting, like it was even bigger than that. Like, what do you think is the most, let's say, exciting use case you've seen so far?
Exciting use case?
Exciting for you.
I mean, I'm really excited by the space stuff because the space stuff was always fun before, and you know, the other, there's like the R&D exciting, and then there's boring, and sometimes boring is kind of exciting in the sense that boring lets you do stuff really that you didn't think you could do before. So like a lot of it, you know, it's really, you know, when you talk about it, it's super boring. Like, oh, we're going to do static analysis of code, or like we have to have all this tooling to actually, you know, make sure that everything's secure and that, you know, it will run correctly the first time, every time. And it fundamentally is boring stuff. But then once you realize that you've met all those requirements,
The benefit.
that you can start talking about doing medical applications, that you can really talk about putting vehicles on the road safely, which not everyone does, and you can talk about going up into space and doing, you know, things that like are really expensive, really dangerous stuff.
Yeah.
Once you get the boring stuff out of the way, they might actually be possible.
Yeah, like road certification ain't easy, right? You have to invest the time to actually make that happen, right? I fully agree with you. What would be the most like odd use case?
Odd use case. Oh man.
I gotta say, like the bugs are very odd to me.
Well, no, but the thing is the bug thing, right? Like getting back to like like having a hexapod robot is no different than having a robot dog. It's the same. It's just different animals have slightly different variations of the same way of doing things. God, strangest. I mean, I'm sure there's Ross running and weird, you know, like some of the food stuff. It's like seems really weird, but it's not weird because it's really like, well, you take this thing, you move it over here, you do this thing to it, you move it over here.
Yeah.
I think that stuff's actually kind of interesting.
It's like an assembly line, right?
Yeah, but very, very high end, very, very like intense, complex industrial automation. Because that was always my kind of interest too. Is that there's really good industrial automation, but if you want to kick it up a notch where things are a little bit less structured, it gets really hard.
Yeah, but I think that's something I learned from you. Like, oh, yeah, industrial automation, they're actually bots. Like, they're just huge bots. They're doing things. And I actually never switched that in my mind to see it that way. Because if you think about it, yeah, it actually makes sense. They're just automating things, and they're like sensors that are adapting the thing that you need to get out the output and just transforming it along the way.
Well, the break with that kind of stuff comes at like you have this PLC, right? You have this thing that had the most simple, at the end of the day, the program was the most simple logic you could think of. And, you know, slowly moving to like, well, you need that PLC to control the power and route everything safely. But moving from that like simple ladder logic and stuff that they'd run on those PLCs to more complex systems where you actually need this computer in a black box shoved somewhere to do the thing that you want it to do. That's the change that's happening right now.
Yeah, I saw an example in ROSCon about there was a company in Japan that were doing food automation for vending machines, and I think I'm gonna go to the Tokyo train station because they're doing pasta in there, and I want to see that live. Like, I think that was so cool. Like, and it sounds simple, but actually by looking at the talk, it's like, oh wow, this is a lot of work.
Yeah, and what you don't realize is like it's like everything's probabilistic in manufacturing because like if you think about it, if you have a ball of pasta, if you make spaghetti 10,000 times and you pick it up and you drop it, pick it up and drop it, 1 in 10,000 times it goes flying to the side of the thing, and
Yeah.
you got to account for that, and that's the difficult part. It's not the thing that you do all the time. It's the 1 in 10,000, 1 in 100,000 things
Yeah.
that can
I
go
mean,
wrong.
I don't even make past that right though most of the time. But then I feel like, wow, this is a machine that is actually doing that. But you're right, like this is, at the end of the day, it's just a probabilistic machine, and it's just a problem that we're solving in the simplest way that we could express it. And I think that's really powerful in the fact that people can now rely on a robotics platform to do that. Where do you sort of see the industry going in the next 5 years?
I mean, it's going to continue to grow. Especially now, I think there's been a definite, things have slowed down, I think, a little bit in Silicon Valley and investing in a lot of things, except robotics. It's still like, oh yeah, wait, you can just replace all, this thing that we were doing manually with a robot. It's been going.
I think
pretty
Silicon
crazy.
Valley is afraid of hardware.
Yeah, well, yeah, definitely, because I've been in that space too, and it's expensive. Yeah, you can't. It's
really
not something
high
you
risk.
can turn around in like if you're lucky in 2 years you can turn something around, but it takes a long time. It's hard. You have a physical thing that has to be fixed in the field. It's got to be packaged. It's got to move around the world. Hardware is even harder now too, right? Because
And the
can't
manufacturing is just becoming a nightmare.
becoming an absolute nightmare. You can't even get components.
Yeah, I think that like in the drone industry, that's been just hammering and limiting us so hard, and it's forcing us to adapt the way we're actually working.
But that's it's going to be even more difficult. But that's actually quite a bit of opportunity, right? Because if things are moving around in terms of where they're produced, and say, like, at least from an American's perspective, that we want to finally, because I was saying 10 years ago that eventually things are going to come back. Maybe it was just wishful thinking because I was from Detroit.
Yeah.
But that things are going to come back. Well, that means you get a redo, because like industrial automation, once it works, you
don't
keep
touch
it running and you don't touch it too much. And if you have to build the whole thing, you have to put all the capital in. It's sort of how can we do this?
Yeah. And speaking of, where do you see the investment happening right now? Where is it coming from, and where is it being placed?
I mean, there's a fair bit of standard venture capital. I think there's a lot of strategic investment on the part of industry.
Mhm.
Industry's always a lot slower to move on things, and because they don't necessarily have offices where the startups are, and they got to find them, and then they kind of got to vet them, and
Yeah.
it takes a while. But I do seem to see more of it.
I see a lot of companies that not even having a headquarters anymore. Like they're just working from home, everyone.
Yeah, well, like there was a robot lawnmower startup that we've worked with at Open Robotics, and they just got did a partnership and got a big round of investing, and so it was. I think more of that, right, where people, the thing I hear, and this is biased because the biggest company I've ever worked at is like a couple hundred people, but my sense in working with large companies is you can't do these things in large companies, and fundamentally it's all acquisition based. And so it's going through that process. Right?
Acquisition driving innovation in those large companies.
Yeah.
And I want to bring up another topic that I know you're very passionate about, and I think it sort of ties in with the investment. Do you see a lot of defense investment and a lot of defense movement and action during this community? Because honestly, in our industry, there's a lot of it, and it's very heavy-handed at times, and there's a reason for that. But I want to see know your opinion about it, and see if you've observed the same thing in the wider robotics industry.
I would like to see it plotted. I don't know. I mean, so I've been an engineer for a long time now. I started as a defense contractor, so I know what it's like. I know what's been going on. And like when I started my career, people were building, the first drones, and that was a big thing. Is that big fixed wing drones, and it's always been a thing. I don't think it's a bigger thing now. What I think is more interesting is the commercial side. People putting together things they couldn't put together on a commercial scale, and that's where people I think are kind of worried.
Yeah, definitely. And there was a recent statement by Open Robotics and a few other companies. What was the motivation about that?
Well, I think the motivation, and part of it is I have to preface this with saying, like, we have very little control over what other people do. And so we just need to make a statement on, well, we see things happening out there that we don't really appreciate, right? Like, I don't like seeing, any kind of mobile robot with weapons attached to it. That's not something I want to support. Now, this was an anti-weaponization letter,
Yeah.
right? And we need to
Yeah.
be very, very clear, because when people read these things, not everyone has great reading comprehension.
Yeah, they
And
think
so-
it's like a ban on everything.
Well, it's either a ban on everything, or it's saying, like, don't work with the military at all, which there are, like, people who say, like, we will work with the military, but we do not want to put weapons on things. And so, to be very, very specific, we were saying we do not want to work with weapon systems and robots. And I think everyone who signed that letter has the same intent. Like, we do not do we do not add weapons to robots. That's not something we're interested in doing. And that's something we don't think anyone else should do. So it's just to be, very, very clear that it's a weaponization issue, not necessarily a military issue. But the other interesting thing about the reading comprehension side of it is, this is something I didn't really think about ahead of time, is that, immediately when you say this is just something we're not going to do, it becomes a reflection of whatever's happening in the world at that time. And you're like, people think that you're making a statement on any given conflict.
Yes.
When you're making a statement on all conflict.
Yeah.
And and then I think the biggest other response we got was, well, this is never going to work. And that one was the most frustrating, because it's, I know that these things have worked, but we have said, we're going to stop using landmines, that, we're going to stop using chemical weapons. It's totally something within our power to say that, like, we don't want to do that. We don't think anyone else should do that. And that people should talk to their governments and say, we don't think this is something that should be done.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's important to draw the line somewhere and like have a very clear line where it is, because I don't think we can afford to have a gray line that you cannot really tell where things are. And I also draw my personal line in the weaponization. Like, I don't want to work even close to anything that is weaponizing any type of robot. But at the same time, I do see a lot of benefit in helping in some other ways, perhaps not directly in the weaponization, but honestly, a standardization of either interfaces. There's a lot of different things that could be done in the industry, and that could benefit people, like ultimately help human
It's
race.
a dual-use technology. It can be used in a lot of different ways, and we're just making it better.
Yeah.
I mean, when I started my career, I was a defense contractor, but I never built weapon systems. I actually did kind of the opposite of it. Like, I worked on systems where it's like training people, like, quite frankly, the US military has a problem with the escalation of force, and how do you teach people to do escalation of force properly? And like, okay, that's something I could actually sign on to. I'm okay with that. But, it's all these things are very nuanced. You can't just say one or the other.
Yeah, no, and I think there was a lot of criticism on the statement because of that, because there's so many angles you can take on this, and I know that. But yeah, people need to be reading better, and taking things with a grain of salt is fine, but doing a blank statement and saying, yeah, this is never going to work, well, that's the reason. Like, you're not doing anything to help make that happen.
If everyone says we're not going to do this, then it doesn't happen.
Exactly. Yeah, no, I appreciate the fact that you put that together. And how did it came to be? Like, did you approach the company? Did the company, was this like a conversation over dinner sometime? At some point?
There were lots of, part of it was motivated by individual actors and people responding to, like, we don't appreciate what's going on here. But beyond that, it was sort of a series of discussions that were branching out small. It started small, and people started, grouping together and putting together like a rough draft of what they wanted to achieve.
Okay.
And it's probably just a first step as well. Like, it's really just saying, like, this is the table stakes. These are the people who are saying we're not doing this.
And you got to start somewhere. Obviously. Then I think also this speaks about the maturity of the industry as well, and the maturity of the community specifically. And where do you see this community going? You already said in the 5 years, but what about the next 20 years? Or where do you see the technology being applied?
That's an interesting one, right? Because, like, you look at computer history is interesting, right? Because you're like, well, like we were just looking at an old camera, right? It's
Yeah.
25 years old. And like, I'm sure there's also like subroutines on there that haven't really changed. I know that there's banks that are still running COBOL for,
A lot of them.
yeah. And so it'll be a progression. There'll be a lot more robots, I believe. I think there'll be more in people's lives. I mean, for example, like 10 years ago, they had robotic vacuums. They were expensive. I didn't have one. I didn't think I needed one. And now I can pick one up for like $200. And I'm like, this is the greatest thing ever. This saves me 5 hours a week, and I want more of these. And like, you got a sweeping robot, and we've got a mopping robot. And you're like, this actually saves me a bunch of time. I'm great with it.
Yeah, definitely. And then do you think those bots are going to eventually be talking to each other and doing more orchestration together? Or do you still see them like, yeah, this is one thing and we'll never actually be
Well, so
coordinated?
we're working on that. That's actually the hot topic right now. Is how you're starting to have situations in places, so like hospitals, train stations, big labor intensive organizations where task by task by task individual robots are replacing what you had somebody who was called a gopher who just moved stuff from over here to over here.
Yeah.
And so you're having tons of robots starting to move material, for lack of a better word. But there's different kinds. They have to interact with the infrastructure out there. And so for the past few years, we've been working with like the General Hospital in Singapore to start working on these kind of problems. Like, it's a hospital, you have disinfection robots, you have robots moving food, you have robots cleaning the floors, and how do you get all those robots to interact with each other, interact with the people that are there, interact with the elevators, the cramped hallways, the emergencies, all the other like long tail of weird stuff that the robots are going to have to deal with if they're going to be around all the time.
Yeah, I think the healthcare use cases are really important, specifically after the huge burden that we had on the healthcare system in itself, thanks to the pandemic, and then having bots there to actually help with that. I think it's really valuable. We just saw the example of the bot that was doing the surgery. I think that's like more specialized, but like even doing things like cleaning dishes, like cleaning like.
I call our dishwasher the dish robot, but that's like that's like, where do you draw the line on robots thing?
Yeah, I know, and it's like, how do you talk to each other and how do you make sure that things are happening and orchestrated? Because at the end of the day, you don't want a human to be able to be dictating that at all times. There needs to be some orchestration, and how do one communicates to the other? Do you sort of see that happening at the edge, or like more like there's going to be this central station that is going to be ultimately at least mandating or scheduling, and then the edges actually decide for themselves to some degree?
I don't know. Personally, I get a little creeped out by like having all the devices on air. Like my vacuum, I like it really dumb. I just throw it in a room, press a button, and I come and pick it up earlier. I'm more of a fan of press a button. Like, I don't think it necessarily has to be complex. It may not. Maybe maybe having like an app actually makes things more difficult.
It does probably. Well, right now,
Yeah,
based
more complexity.
the user experience, I don't. And then that's all another topic that I also saw at ROSCon, like the interaction with the robots in itself. Like, there's something that we don't think of often. Like, how do you control this? And you buy brand B versus A, and it's a completely different experience.
Well, the interesting one that's come up in the past 2 years is seeing somebody like Foxglove, right? And we've done a lot of work building more of like developer tools for robots, but we still don't have like a really good, like if you're building an Android app, right? There's basically, I forget what it's called, right? But there's like the SDK that you make the buttons and you make the the scrolly part. And you do all the interactions, and we don't have a good SDK for like basic robot interactions that is used consistently.
Yeah.
And that's the problem, is that like if you have to do it from scratch every single time, it's not going to be consistent, and like consistency is really good. Like I used to make this thing that like everyone keeps changing interfaces. Maybe if we just stuck with like Windows 95 interfaces, people wouldn't relearn, like have to relearn. It'd be more usable. Like you learn it once and you're gonna use the same thing. It'd be ugly, but like it'd be more usable.
And people would know it. Like, but there needs to be standardization, and we need to come together and say, okay, this is how it's gonna work. Do the first step, and then keep iterating on top of that.
If you're a designer and you want to do robotics, that is a like good startup idea. Would be to sit there and say like, let's just do the HRI part of it.
Where do you see Open Robotics going? Where do you go from here? It sounds like you're really successful. You got a lot of things going. The event this week was tremendously great for everyone that I spoke to. Where do you take this from? Like, where do you go now?
I mean, we're pretty consistent, right? And it's a little bit of a change for me from Silicon Valley. We're just very consistent of like, we're going to keep grinding on ROS2, working with people to help them use ROS2 to build what they're going to build. And then, the big one for us is OpenRMF now, right? That like, we have all the tooling to build the individual robots. How do we take the next step up and like do fleet management and do multi-fleet management and build the same set of tools, the sort of consistent set of tools for all these things. And that's I think what we're going to be grinding on for the next few years is really like, because good software takes a long, like if you look at ROS, right, it's what, 15, I mean, Open Robotics is 10, so that means ROS is like 15, 16, sort of, and the like primitives that, like, there are parts of ROS that we definitely wrote in grad school that are like the same, like conceptually, they're just maybe different re-implementations. So these things that take a long time to do really, really well. And I think it's just going to be continuing to go down that path of like slow, consistent, iterative development of, systems. And there is going to be some branching out, right? Because there's definitely some stuff you have to do as you move into like industry. So, but the way Open Robotics grows and the way ROS grows is not, it's not like a business, it's like a community. And so it's more of a federated environment. So you have like, you look at ROS, right? So people are doing robots and then everyone's like, well, I want to do a bunch of stuff with arms. And then sort of people build Move It. And then like, there's the whole Move It crew and they're moving in directions, building a better thing. And we're like affiliated and people want to do navigation. So there's Nav2 and they're a group and they're doing, working in a direction. And so it's not, we'll probably keep doing the same things. What I see more happening and more consistently is, these sort of spin-out groups in a particular direction. You can, like right now, there's like a nascent maritime group. I think there is a lot around like usability that's coming out. There's stuff around space. And all these places are going to kind of like, people are going to coalesce and they're going to go build their own org to do the thing that they need to do.
Yeah, I think that's really cool. And I appreciate the fact that you've been like slowly adding progress to it because you need a stable base. And like the moment you change things radically, like the community is gonna come out in arms. Like, no, like don't change this on me so fast. Like we need to slowly get there. But I don't think like we can articulate it that way either. But one thing that I'm really interested in, and memory was chalked during ROSCon, was that everyone knew their problems with what they were doing, and they were trying to find a way to fix it by looking for other people that had the same problem. And that doesn't happen naturally. Like, you have to sort of guide the community and teach them how to like do that and approach it that way, because in other open source communities that doesn't really happen naturally. Like, and it's something that even our community struggles a lot. Why do you think that is, that the ROS community functions the way it does?
I think a lot of it's just duocracy, right? Like the way you write a standard in ROS is that you don't have like a bunch of people in a room like overthinking the standard and really like, what's the perfect way to do this without actually doing it. It's more of, I'm going to do this and it's roughly like this, and then it's like, it's not quite right, but it's close, and here, let me show you this part you got right, but this other part you didn't get right. And then you tweak it and you go and do the next iteration. I think it's a lot more iterative, and it's a lot it's a little bit of a different process, but at the end of the day, it builds a better thing because you actually have to, build something that's working, and if it works, proof's in the pudding. Then you go that way.
We're running out of time, so we have two final questions.
Okay.
One is how do you think the drone community can help the overall ROS community, and how can we integrate it more?
Well, I think, there needs to be, a vision to say that, hey, we're going to have Rostron, or I mean, and part of this exists already, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like there are these tools, but putting multiple people together that work consistently towards something, trying to build that community, having a place for people to at least meet online and like share things and that sort of thing. I think that's how you start moving in the right direction. Yeah, that's the first step. Um, there's always things around standards and how components communicate, and you might be a little hard on the drone community because I do think they're doing reasonably well. It exists, so it's definitely there.
No, I think my criticism is like a more self-reflection, like, hey, I was part of the problem that I observed and I want to fix it. So I'm very vocal about this. It might seem that I'm hard on it, but it's only because I want to make sure that everyone knows that this exists and we have to fix it. And you can't fix it if you don't know that that's a problem. So that's sort of like the approach that we're trying to take. And I appreciate the fact that there's ways to fix that and to actually form groups or subgroups within the ROS community to do that. We actually had a meetup yesterday with the Robotics folks, which I didn't know there were so many. Mm-hmm. And we actually did take the first step, which I'll be talking to you soon about.
Is there a working group coming?
Not yet. Not yet.
No.
At some point, yes. But that's where the ultimate direction we might end up. Because there's a lot of wasted effort, like a lot of research groups are like creating great stuff, and then lead researcher leaves, typical story. A lot of that doesn't really get ported anywhere.
Oh, that's a consistent problem.
Yeah.
Across all where open source touches research, that's just a consistent problem.
Exactly. So we need to standardize a lot, and I think that's where we can bring a lot of the value there.
Well, the thing that we've talked about in ROS for that particular problem is at least having quality levels, like saying like this is research code, this is like high-end production code, mm-hmm. and being like clear in saying that like I'm a graduate student, this is graduate student code. It may look really cool, but it's really brittle, and then like saying, okay, well, it's in the really brittle phase. We probably do have to rewrite it, and it needs somebody to take care of it too. Somebody's actually got to own it.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's where we're struggling right now to move things into the other direction. The last question I have, and it might be more like wildcard question, so get ready. Mm-hmm. What do you think is one thing that the community doesn't know about CAD that they should know?
What? That's a hard one. I have to tell about myself.
And you can make it fun. You can talk about work. You can talk about yourself.
Well, I've been exhausted all week, but coffee has kept me alive.
Wait, I got it.
I got it. Yes. There you go. I try to go outside after I've sat in front of a computer all day.
I gotta say, by just my meeting you, and I have not met you for a long time now, at least maybe throughout this year, but we've had a few interactions more closer than before. You are inspiring. You're like a leader that doesn't try to be a leader and then ends up being a leader.
Yeah.
And that's not something that happens naturally. So I appreciate that a lot.
I think that's a fair assessment. And I've had to lead people, but you lead by example. You don't tell people what to do. That's the worst way to lead.
Well, sometimes you're bossy, but in the right way. And I like that.
In the mother hen way.
Exactly. Yeah. We were joking the other day, like, is that one of your kids?
Yes, exactly. Is that one of your positions? Or you need to be over here right now.
Yeah. Hey, you need to meet him. Like, go do that.
Exactly.
Solve that problem. Well, I want to thank you for your time again, and thank you for helping put together a great ROS event. I know it was a team effort.
We'll we'll be in the U.S. next year. Come next year.
Oh, yeah, for sure. We'll be at New Orleans.
Yeah, or if you can't make it, just do one at your local area.
And we'll be doing more of those soon with the Open Robotics meetup thing that we sort of put together. Well,
I'm easy to get a hold of. If you want to put together an event, just message me. I'll help you out. I can at least give you a rundown.
All right. Well, thank you so much for your time, and I'll see you next time, maybe in New Orleans.
Oh, I'll see you before.
Yes, for sure. All right, everyone. Bye.
Bye.